Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second in the Chartwell Agency Lunch Bite series. Thank you for all of you who are returning again, and welcome to those of you who may be joining us for the first time. My name is Emily Hartzog. I'm Vice President of Chartwell Agency, and like I said, this is the second in a 5-part series. We really just want to provide you some information that hopefully lets you wrap your hands and your head around maybe some of the challenges you're facing. For those of you who may not be familiar with Chartwell Agency, we are an integrated marketing and public relations firm. We specialize in 3 areas: healthcare, finance, and education, but we often work with clients outside of those areas. We're really happy to have you all with us. A few quick bits of housekeeping here for you to note. The one that I want to draw your attention to right now is the chat. Please use the chat. Go ahead, tell us where you're watching or listening from right now. Introduce yourself to everybody else who's on the line. We have one of my colleagues, Liz Lasdens, who is monitoring the chat for me. So if you have questions, if you want me to go back or slow down, let us know. We're being flexible, so use that chat feature and let's create a community. So before we get started, we would like to do a little poll and find out who's watching today and where are you from? So the question we would like to ask is, what type of organization are you representing today? Are you with healthcare, financial, education, nonprofit, or other? So I'll give you just a quick few seconds. Go ahead and let us know. See, there's several of you on. You should have a screen that pops up that allows you to answer. You can click on that. Kind of by your chat feature. See some friends from healthcare and nonprofit. Hi, everybody. Just a few more seconds while these come in. And I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. Hopefully you all got a chance to vote. You can see the poll results in the chat box. There's a little poll with a caret if you want to see where we're all coming from, but it looks like we have a mix of healthcare, nonprofit, a few financial friends. So thank you so much for joining us today. Let's jump right in. So today's topic is understand your customers in a downturn. It lends itself to the topic we tackled last week, which is what happens when your marketing goes out the window. So today we're kind of digging in deep of what are your consumers, what are your patients thinking, and how can you best respond to those needs. So today we're going to understand 4 types of consumer responses during a recession. We're going to also look at where your service or your product might fit into their lives based on circumstances right now. We're going to go through some questions that help you plan not only for right now, but for what happens next. And then obviously helping you tailor your approach, because we're all looking at what's the best way to handle this. So I want to start with some basic consumer response. I think if this situation has taught us anything, it's that consumer response is not always easy to predict. I mean, who would have thought that a respiratory illness would cause a mad rush to the stores for toilet paper? But I think what that tells us is that human psychology does impact our behavior, and stressors and change that we experience in times like this causes us to react in sometimes unpredictable ways. Now, in the case of toilet paper, it really got to a primal need. Anxiety around not being able to get to that product created this mad rush. And there was also this narrative that there was a shortage, which exacerbated the problem. So I think there's some lessons that we can learn there. But one of the most important lessons is that economics is really about psychology. I mean, as marketers, I don't think we would naturally assume we have a lot in common with economists, but the most important part of being able to model economics is understanding human behavior and understanding how the stories we tell really impact the way we behave economically, how we spend our money, how we make investments, how we manage the organizations. And when we talk about storytelling and narratives driving behavior, I mean, that's what we do in marketing every day. So there you go. Marketers and economists are very related. Just to give you a quick Econ 101, what we're dealing with right now, what we're hoping for is what they call a V-shaped curve. That means that we see a dip in consumer behavior. We see a dip in our economy. Obviously, we know that that's happening right now, but then it bounces right back, and we're kind of right back on that same curve, that same trajectory. So a V shape means there's a blip, but we can get right back to it. What we're trying to avoid is what's called a U-shaped curve. And that's when we see the dip in the behavior, but we never really come back to that pre-recession or pre-downturn level. So what we're all hoping to create and to drive is a V-shaped rather than a U-shaped curve. So that's a little Econ 101 for you. Now, as we're looking at this situation, and we have analysts and forecasters trying to help us as organizations prepare, the only thing we have to look back on is history. And the most recent recession was 2008, 2009, but this is completely different. And I think as marketers, that makes this kind of challenging because we don't have a lot of data we can look back on and say, well, this is what happened in 2008, so this is what we can anticipate. You know, in 2008, the underpinnings of the economy were not great. So that had been deteriorating for a long time. And so it took us a lot longer to recover. I think what our organizations, whether you represent a credit union or a health system or a community hospital, I think what we can look to now is that we're hoping that this is something where the underpinnings of our economy is still really strong. All of our capability is still there. And we as marketers, therefore, may need to be prepared to jump right back in more quickly than we would in perhaps, say, 2008 when we had a ton of consumer distrust and we had kind of the foundation of our economy was not super solid. That being said, we are facing some very real challenges. We have historic unemployment, which is to be expected because we're not all out and about the way we normally would be, and that makes people behave differently. Your patients are making different decisions about when and if to proceed with elective procedures. Your consumers, if you're a financial institution, are really looking at their money and maybe how it's invested or what they're doing with it and how to conserve, where to cut corners, what makes sense. We're all engaging with our brands totally differently than we have in the past. And so all of that really leads to a change in how we deal with our budgets. Now, budgets, we know, at least for consumers, when we see a recession, when we hear that narrative, right, that story being told to us, we start cutting. And then that trickles down to all of our organizations who then look at advertising. Then we look at the investments we've made. We look at the R&D that we're doing, and we decide, you know, what needs to be cut as a result of that. Now, as marketers, we should be playing in all of those sandboxes, and we should be providing information that helps our organizations make good decisions. So in order for us to do that really effectively, we need to understand what's going on in the minds of our members, our customers, our patients during a recession. I got this next bit of information is available from Harvard Business Review, but before we jump into it, I want you real quick to picture in your mind your ideal customer, your ideal patient, your ideal member. And I want you to kind of think about who that person is and how they represent kind of the larger scope of your organization. And I want you to picture them in your mind, because as I talk about these four psychologies, I want you to kind of think about where your ideal, where your normal or your persona might land here. Okay, so have that in your mind? Yes? Okay. So when we talk about psychological segmentation, and as marketers, we do segmentation all the time, so this should be super familiar. But when we get into recession psychology, there are four categories that people tend to fall into: slam on the brakes, pained but patient, comfortably well off, and live for today. So we're going to talk a little bit about each one of those. Like, no surprise here, my slam on the brakes people, they tend to be our most vulnerable populations. They are the ones that are hardest hit by any economic implications. So they make the most dramatic cuts to their behaviors, to their spending. They can be lower income, but they can also be really risk averse, moderate to higher income people, because really this is about how you feel. It doesn't always necessarily match with reality. But if you feel very anxious, if you feel very concerned, even if the actual balance of your accounts doesn't say you're in kind of dire straits, you can still move to this slam on the brakes psychology. The next group is pained but patient. They are maybe not confident about short run, but in the long run, they tend to be pretty confident. They're able to wait it out. They do represent the largest segment of your customer base. So most people fall into this pained but patient. Now, that being said, the longer things go, they can then ride that wave over to slam on the brakes pretty quickly too. They will economize. They will look for deals and bargains. They will look for substitutes. They are open to alternatives. They have concerns but they also kind of, like I said, feel generally optimistic about what's going to happen in the long run. And they do represent a wide range of economic levels. The third group is comfortably well off. This group feels pretty sure that they can ride out the current situation. They will continue to consume at pretty much pre-recession or pre-downturn levels. They may try to do that a little less conspicuously because they are aware of the environment. So this group can be upper income brackets, but it can also be individuals that are fairly stable. So, for your comfortably retired or those that have pretty low risk investments, they can fall into this comfortably well off category. And then finally, we have the live for today. As the title might suggest, these individuals pretty much carry on as usual. They're relatively unconcerned about savings or making major investments, and that's because they tend to be younger and they tend to be urban. So they're probably not looking, at least in the short run, at a major purchase like a house, and they're able to put off major purchases like cars. But really, they're not as likely to look for substitutes or to be concerned about that unless unemployment or something more dramatic happens, and then they may shift into one of the other categories. But generally, they don't adjust their spending too much if they're in this live for today category. Now, so I want you to real quick take a moment, and if you have a piece of paper or a pen, I want you to jot down where you think your average member, customer, patient, if you're a healthcare, where you think they live. Do they live in that slam on the brakes, or they live for today? And I want you to just make a quick note of that, because it will be helpful as we now talk about your products, your services, and how that layers into where they fit there. So your to-dos right now, you really need to follow economic indicators. There's a really great series going on NPR right now, all about economics. They had a really interesting economist on today talking about storytelling and in economies and how economics really relies on a narrative. You should understand your customers' recession psychology. You would understand what motivates your customers on any other day, but today is a different day. So you need to understand what motivates your customers, your patients, your members today, given some of the economic narratives that are out in our world. And then recognize you may need to adjust your marketing. If you need to take a moment, watch our webinar number 1 on what happens when your marketing plan goes out the window. There's some great tips in there about adjusting your marketing. So shifting gears, now we kind of know where our consumers or our patients or members sit in terms of their psychology. But now it's time to say, where do you fit into their scheme of things? And products or services fall into 4 major categories. They can be essential, treats, postponables, or expendables. Now, for most of us, essentials is the only category where we all agree on one thing. So in treats, postponables, expendables, it's kind of fair game. So I'll throw this up here. Give us a quick comment in the chat if you know what this is. I would expect some of you probably do. The way your customers or your members rank you is completely dependent on a host of variables that's unique to them. So for those of you who don't know what this is Benefits Bad Gal Mascara. Now, for some of you, you may say that's totally an expendable purchase. That's something that doesn't need to be purchased right now. I can cut it out. And for others, you would say, this is one of my most important things every day. It maintains my sanity. It's a total essential item. So that just goes to underscore how people will rank things differently based on their personal priorities. And so outside of the essentials category, like the food, shelter, water, that sort of thing, the way people place your products and services is going to be really unique to them. So when you think about this sort of segmentation, realize you're painting with broad strokes and that you kind of need to think in terms of that general persona of your member. Okay, so here's where the rubber meets the road, right? So we have along the left-hand side, the category of your consumer or your patient. And then across the top, we have those categories of products and services. Now, during a recession or a downturn, if you are considered essential, pretty much you're not going to see a huge impact to your operations. Most people are going to continue to consume at pre-recession levels. They may look for deals or bargains, but really green means go. So not much is going to change for you. Now, for most of you, you might find yourselves in that yellow category, especially like my healthcare practices for your elective surgeries. You might find yourself in a postponable, or maybe it's something that people look at a little differently. Postponables, as a marketer, you're really trying to work hard to stay top of mind, because if it's a treat, we want to encourage people to continue to trust the brand, deliver value where they need it. If it's postponable, we know that while they may not be able to do it right now, we need to be staying top of mind, so the minute they're in a good position, they can go right back and they can schedule that appointment, or they can make that shift, they can take out that loan, they can do whatever it is that they were going to do they just had to put off. If you are in the red category, you need to be looking very seriously about what this recession is telling you. If you, for a good portion of your consumers, are completely expendable, maybe we're not meeting their needs as well as we could. And so again, underscoring the need for some consumer research, some market research, finding out what we need to be doing. So this chart layers everything on top of each other. Think about your customer, think about how you rank in their life, and then say, let's adjust our marketing strategy. If I'm in the red, I want to think about how I can at least move into yellow, right? Okay, so the questions you're going to want to ask yourself, again, where would I place my customers in that matrix? And then where would my customers place me? If you find yourself in the yellow or the red, we're not just going to accept that and let it be. Marketing is about finding a need and meeting it. So we're going to ask ourselves the questions. And for those of you on last week, they may look familiar to you. What do my customers feel right now? What do my customers need right now? How can I be of service? So we're not trying to get people to buy or do things that aren't appropriate. We are trying to get them to respond and to take on behaviors and meet their needs. So that's what we are trying to do. So now it's time to tailor that strategy. This is just a quick reminder from your Marketing 101 days that marketing is not just about promotion. I think very often marketers get put into that promotion bucket and we forget how important the marketing mix is. And the marketing mix includes all 5 of those P's. So we should be looking at our product. Does our product continue to meet the needs? If it's a postponable, is behavior going to change? Is that going to be different? Are my members going to interact differently with my credit union when they come out of this? And do I need to update my products as a result? Or my elective surgeries aren't being scheduled now. So how do I prove value to my patients when I can't see them face to face? That's where telehealth is really starting to surge. Your place, your distribution. I think place is a conversation a lot of marketers are having right now because our traditional place, our bricks and mortar establishments aren't where we're delivering the most value right now. Is that going to continue to be the case? And are we prepared to handle that? Price point, people are looking for substitutes. They're looking for deals. Is now a good time to run a promotion? Is now a good time to say, hey, we're going to meet you halfway? You see a lot of this in some of the advertising that's running with car loans or other sorts of things where, you know, they're saying, hey, we're gonna reduce the interest rate, or there's no payments, or if you get laid off because of COVID, we're going to do this for you. So pricing and where to place yourself. You'll also see brands introduce down market child brands during times like this. Of course, promotion, that's what everybody thinks of. What do my ads say? How am I spending my promotional dollars? Where am I targeting? How am I targeting? And then people. People is the service side. I think for a lot of us, the people side is kind of a question mark right now. And so we really need to be thinking about the marketing mix, all 5, not just about promotion. And thinking about, are we in the green? Are we in the yellow? Or are we in the red? If we're in the red, we really need to look at all elements of these 5 Ps and figure out where we need to adjust if we want to come out of this successfully. Just to give you kind of some examples so that this all makes sense, I want to show you how different organizations attacked the recession problem with different elements of those 4 Ps. So you can start thinking a little creatively about how your hospital or your credit union might be able to do it differently. So lesson 1 is from Legos. So 2009 hit, and wouldn't you assume that children's toys would take a hit, but not Lego. And why is that? Well, they knew that the American market was getting hit hardest by the recession, so they expanded into Asia and Europe, and those more global markets really boomed for them during the recession. So, here's an example of them adjusting place. They adjusted their distribution. The other thing they did was, from more of a promotion angle, they started showing adults playing with Legos, that Legos weren't just for kids. So they kind of expanded their market by adjusting their promotions and showing that these weren't just kids' toys. The other thing they did is they started showing reuse. So when they asked, what do my customers need? They needed something to keep their kids entertained. They needed a toy, but they needed a toy that had a lifespan, not the things like I buy my kids that a week later they're in the toy box, never to be seen again. Lego's like, hey, this is a toy. You build it once, you take it apart, you build something new, unlimited opportunities. So here's an example of an organization who saw an opportunity. They expanded their place, their distribution. So they went into new markets. They adjusted their promotions to show different sorts of audiences. And they kind of made sure that they were positioning themselves as a long-term solution instead of just a quick toy. Lesson number 2, meet a need. So if we think back to that matrix and all of those categories in yellow, what did they all have in common? They all had that consumers were looking for lower price alternatives. They were looking for bargains. They were looking for deals. And so Walmart emerged as a huge winner out of 2008 and 2009. Their Save Money, Live Better. I mean, what better promotional tagline to say, hey, we're an alternative for you. So they really adjusted price. That's where they made their mark, where they said, hey, we're an alternative. People who would not otherwise have considered shopping at Walmart all of a sudden said, it's time to take a look. And they were able to pull those customers in and then adjust their behaviors for the long run. So they were able to maintain a lot of that market. Now, Groupon launched actually during the recession. And who would think that an organization with relatively little infrastructure, no brand recognition, no name recognition even, would be as successful? And why were they so successful? It's because they were meeting a huge need. People wanted to save money, and organizations wanted to be able to sell to consumers, reach consumers in a way that was cost effective and easy. And Groupon was like a win-win for all parties. As a result of that, they went ahead and launched, and they of course, we all know Groupon today, so hugely successful. So meet a need. The next is offering an alternative. So again, think back to that matrix. What are your consumers feeling? They may be feeling pinched for their personal budgets. What do they need? How can you fill a need? Well, that's where Netflix jumped in. During the 2008-2009 recession, they attracted 3 million more subscribers in that period of time. By the end of 2009, their stock price went up 57%. So huge win. Why was that? Is because they really worked at positioning themselves as an alternative to cable and satellite TV, which was proving more expensive for consumers. So whereas your consumers on most normal days might not have been really interested in cutting their ties with their traditional entertainment outlets, the door opened. Netflix was ready to jump in and say, hey, we're an alternative. We're a lot less, and we'll be all the entertainment that you need during this time. And again, they were able to capture those consumers, and more importantly, they were able to maintain them after the recession. So that's also the lesson learned there. Playing the long game. So this is something we're talking to our clients about a lot. Obviously, it's easy to kind of take fear in when we hear all these headlines and we hear these things happening, and we want to protect our organizations, we want to protect our brands. But again, we're hoping for that V-shaped curve, that we're going to bounce right back to where we were. We're trying to avoid that U-shaped curve. So it is important that we have conversations about the long game. So for Amazon, other companies were pretty hard hit, obviously, by the recession, but Amazon actually saw sales rise 25%. They decided that they were going to be the low cost alternative because their goal for the long run was to capture market. So in the short run, they were willing to take lower profits and to have lower profit margins in order to capture the market. That was their long game. They said, for right now, people are looking for low cost. We are going to be the low cost provider of a lot of different things. We're going to take the hit now, but we're going to earn the market share in the long run. And obviously, Amazon is like, it's practically a verb now. I Amazoned today. And the other thing that's really important to note is they tried to make their service a differentiator. So again, thinking long-term, not only how do we attract these consumers, but how do we maintain our market share? How do we keep them coming back? Domino's Pizza is another one. They looked at that grid. I'm sure they sat around and looked at that chart we were looking at earlier, and they found themselves probably in the treat category, an expense that most consumers could justify. So they had done significant consumer research, market research on redoing their recipe. And they decided that even though there was a recession, they were going to go forward with their new marketing campaign, which they'd invested in heavily. They went ahead, they did it. They launched their new pizza. They figured we're in that treat category, unless, again, you're part of my family, in which case you skew towards essential for pizza. But they found themselves in that yellow category. They went ahead, they invested, they played the long game. Again, this was the time to capture market share. They were thinking beyond the recession and what it meant for their brand. And Domino's had a massive resurgence. They're kind of back in the mix. So what are your to-dos now? First, take some time to really wrap your head around this recession psychology and how your business or how your hospital or how your credit union plays into this story. Ask yourself the right questions. Again, marketing isn't about pushing something that consumers don't want or need. Marketing is about figuring out what consumers want and need and how we can help. And sometimes that means playing the long game, and sometimes that means making decisions for the short run too. So you need to plan both a short and long-term strategy. Again, the webinar number 1 has some good hints there. So if you want to look back on that one, that may be helpful for you as well. So again, we're going to do another quick poll. This one, I want you to tell me a little bit about what your current marketing efforts are. So tell us about what you're doing. Have you gone completely dark? Have you significantly reduced your efforts? Are you being pretty consistent, or have you doubled down? Are you increasing your marketing efforts? We're really interested to hear where most of you are in this process, what you're thinking, kind of the conversations you're having. So if you're still with us, go ahead. You should have that pop up now. Did it come up? Oh, there you go. I'm seeing some of you are coming in now. I see some votes. Maybe you're just thinking about it. Everybody wanted to kind of take a moment to reflect. I'm going to give you just a few more seconds here. And then I'll end the poll, and you can see kind of what others are doing too. See where you play out. Wow, a lot of you are increasing your efforts, thinking of the long game. Really interesting. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end this so that you can see it. You can see the results. Again, 62% of you are saying you're increasing your efforts. I think it's really a great time to reach consumers and to be that voice that they're used to, that familiar brand message can be really comforting right now. So super interesting. Thank you for taking that poll. We have reached the end of understanding your consumers in a recession. Next week, we're going to talk about doing more with less. So if in the chat you have a moment, tell us what questions you have about doing more with less, and we'll do our best to address some of those specifically. We're going to give you tips and tricks that we know of how to stretch your efforts, how to use the team you have. Maybe you're working with the same number of team members. Maybe you have fewer team members, how to get the work done, and really how to focus your efforts. I'm opening it for questions. So if you have questions for me, so there was a question about what do we consider long-term versus short-term. Most of the consumer behavior surveys that are being done right now are saying that most consumers are thinking things will return to normal in about 6 months. So I would say anything within a 3 to 6 month strategy, I would consider short-term. Your long-term strategies, I would think of more as your strategic plan, your brand trajectory, where you want to go. So 1 year, 3 year, 5 year would be long-term. Now we want to be careful that we don't make a plan for the next 3 to 6 months that really inhibits our goals in the 1 year, 3 year, 5 year category. So there's the balance of short term. I know that we have to make some immediate decisions, but in our mind, that 3 to 6 month range is where you'd be looking for some short term, some immediate. By most indicators, we're kind of feeling like 6 months is a good benchmark. So that would be my short term. Does that answer? I hope that answers your question. Any other questions? How should nonprofits consider their marketing efforts now? Okay, so nonprofits have a real challenge right now, but I think it's important to remember that for most nonprofits, relationship building is key, which means you can't stop communicating. You can't stop talking about why you're important. You may need to reframe why you're important just because people are interacting with your brand differently. But when you think of nonprofits, it's all about the relationship that your brand or your organization has with the people that you're helping. So telling those stories. One thing that's going in your favor is during a recession, people tend to look closer to home. They tend to be more interested in local brands, in local stories, in local people, local organizations. So if you are a nonprofit, localize that story. Make sure that you're telling the immediate impact to the people that they know and love in their own community. So that would be a piece of advice I have for you if you're a nonprofit. A B2B business. I'm so glad somebody asked this. So we had a question about, I'm B2B, we talked consumer. So yes, it still totally applies. So all of those consumer psychologies can apply to an organizational persona. So as you work with your business clients, they will often have a personality. The personality of the organization is very often the personality of the leadership team. So if you have a business client who's run by people who tend to be very conservative, very risk averse, you can anticipate their organizational behaviors to fall into that slam on the brakes kind of mentality. And so you're going to need to meet them where they are in that moment. So yes, organizations kind of can be personified to be just like those consumers. So it totally applies in the B2B world as well. Thank you for asking that question. Really good question. Anything else? We'll give it just a couple more seconds. Again, thank you so much for taking time out of your day for spending 30 minutes with us. We hope that these are helpful. Look forward to next week, which is doing more with less. We look forward to seeing you same time, same place. Until then, keep doing the great work, and thank you all for being a part of today.